Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a podcast about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney. For those of you listening, identifying as an author might feel like a bit of a reach. I'm still on that journey too, but I'm proudly author adjacent. As we dive into today's episode, please know that I am not a professional author. What I am is a man on a journey, and on that journey, I've learned a few things. So as a fellow traveler on the path from writer to author, I started this podcast to share what I've learned and my experiences so far, in the hopes that it will aid you in your personal growth towards the marvelous destination that is being an author. If you've spent more than 5 minutes on the internet learning about the theory of writing, you've probably heard of the age-old battle between pantsers and plotters, architects and gardeners, or discovery writers and outliners. Well, today we're going to demystify these terms and help you figure out which of these tribes you can ascribe to so that you know which uniform to grab during the death match that is Writer Armageddon. Or you can just buy the appropriate stickers for your laptop if you're not as hardcore as some of us. I've touched on these topics in previous episodes, but now we will be getting into those gritty details. Let's start off by defining these terms. Then we can dig into the pros and cons of each process and how they might impact the story you're producing. In the end, I'll go over my own experiences in this topic in the hopes that my tale will give you a head start on your own journey. Pantsing, also known as gardening or discovery writing, comes from the idea of flying or riding by the seat of your pants. This odd phrase apparently comes from early aviation days, when pilots would literally feel out the correct way to steer the plane based on the pressure of their ass against the airplane's seat. They had some really high-tech instruments back in the day, huh? While the idea of flying without a plan might seem terrifying to some of us, apparently some of you thrill-seekers like feeling that way when you're writing. No, I know. Writing and flying a plane aren't the same thing. Writing is much scarier. Pantsers thrive on the chaos of throwing themselves into the void armed with nothing but an idea and a well-sharpened writing implement. They launch into their story with the intent to follow their intuition and hope that by feeling what's right in the moment, they'll find their way to the end of a complete story. Plotting, also referred to as architecting, I'm not sure if that's a word, but I'm going to keep it in there, or outlining, on the other hand, is the opposite. While not as creatively named as the pantser, plotters tend to literally plot out or plan their path, so I guess the name fits. A plotter prefers to have planned out the story with supporting documentation to guide them from beginning to end. They march forward, progressing along a meticulously planned route through their story. They may do some sightseeing along the way, but it's a planned diversion. If their book was a road trip, that map would have bathroom and gas station marked at clear intervals, along with a quick stop at the Grand Canyon and the world's largest ball of twine. While the pantsers and the plotters are often spoke of as mutually exclusive identities that you must choose between, they can be more accurately visualized as the polar ends of a scale. Some author adjacents will represent these poles, but most will find themselves somewhere in the middle, choosing to blend the two strategies. In the next few sections, I'll go over some of the strengths and weaknesses of the extremes. Then we can discuss how to learn from both sides to make our stories the best versions of themselves. First, let's dive into pantsing. Despite any prior impressions, I believe pantsing can hold significant value. Here, we'll explore 3 advantages and 3 disadvantages linked with this approach. Pro number 1, unrestrained imagination. Simply writing without constraints or destination can be incredibly liberating and maybe even a little therapeutic. Free writing fosters a more immersive writing process, often likening to the experience of yoga or meditation. Some would call it yoga for the mind, but those people must suck at yoga because if you're doing it right, it's already great for the mind. Still, the embrace of free writing allows creativity to flourish, as writers can go with any idea that pops into their head without risk of breaking an outline that took weeks to create. This creative abandon also gives the writer more flexibility to develop an authentic voice, They can write scenes that explore emotional themes and test out different writing styles as the mood strikes them. It is more necessary to embrace imperfections and inconsistencies in plot when pantsing, but the reality is that no draft is flawless. It's an important lesson for all writers. Pro number 2, surprising characters. The second benefit of the Pantsers approach to diving headfirst into your story is that it tends to facilitate an organic growth of your characters. Previously developed characters possess distinct beliefs and motivations that guide their actions and choices. This can be extremely restrictive for a pantser. Hence, there's a rationale behind the pantser's method of immersing themselves in a narrative without fully knowing their protagonist and hoping to learn about their flaws and motivations by what feels right in the process of writing them. The pantsing author can be open to actions by their characters that actually surprise them, but feel more true to the person that they've written so far than whatever alternative they expected. As long as the actions feel authentic, surprising character choices is a great way to keep the story interesting. Pro 3, adaptive storylines. For most writers, plot evolution is unavoidable, but for hardcore pantsers, it's a way of life. Spurred by inspirational late-night epiphanies or the aforementioned unpredictable characters, the pantser embraces the unexpected elements of their story. This lack of hesitation can result in a smoother drafting process, as they don't fight their inclinations to explore this story or that character and don't fear changing any of the totally unwritten expectations that might be in the back of their minds. Remaining flexible in plot development makes the most of unexpected twists and evolutions, potentially creating a more captivating story. And now we're on to the cons of pantsing. Number 1. Unexpected blockers. Without a clear narrative plan, pantsers may encounter dead ends or wrong turns. They can still eventually reach their destination, but the quality of the story can suffer when there isn't a clear narrative path to follow. It can also be harder to navigate obstacles when you haven't dedicated time to thinking through and documenting potential paths for your story. The pantser may be forced to backtrack or make awkward jumps in logic or time in order to get back on track. The result can be a story that feels meandering or confusing to the reader at best, and in extreme cases, it can be unclear how to complete the story without starting all over. Finally, the ultimate unexpected blocker, writer's block. It's a challenge for many writers, but for pantsers, their tendency to dive in without a plan can inflame the issue, leaving them staring at a blinking cursor. Con number 2, extensive rewrites. When faced with revisions, pantsers may rue their lack of initial preparation. Not having an outline to start will also mean not having an outline to refer to when your draft and various revisions must be applied. Without character profiles or beat sheets to summarize the current narrative threads and arcs, they must spend additional editing hours finding these before they can discern which to retain and which to discard. Even having made this decision, it may be difficult to know what other parts of the story will be impacted by each change. Because of the potential for meandering, the draft may require extensive editing to correct issues for consistency in plot, timeline, or even the personality of the characters. Had more planning been invested up front, it is possible to reduce the number of editing passes required, potentially saving time in the course of completing the novel. And con 3, the final con for pantsers, is peaks and valleys. A pantser's reliance on inspiration by definition means that progress will be erratic. The highs of creative waves will make writing seem effortless, and it can be easy to progress so long as you are fueled by dopamine and daily word counts. However, when inspiration wanes or goals are missed, the writer can crash hard, leading to periods where writing feels impossible, and there seems to be no right way to continue the story. While intermittent bursts of productivity may not pose a problem unless you are writing with a strict timeline, it can still be discouraging. These highs and lows are another thing to watch out for when choosing the extreme pantsing. When authors embrace a pantsing approach, there are a few characteristics that are more likely to occur in their novels. Unpredictable endings, which deviate from traditional narrative norms, are more likely. The author's voice becomes more prominent in the writing. as a more constant narrative element than carefully chosen themes or tropes. Characters may feel more deep and unpredictable as their traits and actions evolved throughout the writing journey rather than aligning with a character profile. Now that we've grasped the intuitive freedom of pantsers, let's delve into the orderly world of plotters. Once again, I'll be going through 3 advantages and 3 disadvantages for this approach. Pro 1. A clear path. Plotters tend to meticulously structure their outlines, often following a 3-act format or some other alternative detailing each narrative beat. This roadmap provides a clear path forward, delineating not just what needs to happen, but also why and how. The structured approach is especially beneficial for non-linear writing styles. Taking a little inspiration from pantsers around writing what you feel, a plotter who isn't in the mood for writing a difficult scene can skip to it and later come back to that scene, rather than writing in sequence because they have it all planned out. Just like death, writing blocks are inevitable, but at least as a plotter, you'll have your outline to steer the narrative back on course. And since the most common cause of writer's block is not knowing what to write, having the outline to fall back on can be an incredible tool. If you have an outline and still encounter writer's block, it may be a sign that you aren't happy with your initial plan, or just need a little more detail for the next scene. Either way, having the plan to consult enables the plotter to realign their vision and rekindle their creative momentum. Pro number 2. Understood characters. Even the most exciting plot loses its impact if readers don't care about the main character. And I hate to break it to you, but characters are hard. It can be a big challenge to create interesting characters with believable flaws, clear motivations, and relatable backgrounds. As a plotter, you can jot down everything you think you know about your character, from what they like and what they believe in and how they act. Keep these notes, but refine them over time. Having this in the writing keeps the character consistent throughout the story and makes them feel more real to the readers. It's like getting to know a friend really well. The more you know about them, the better you understand their actions and their choices. Pro number 3. Fewer rewrites. A well-plotted draft typically requires less extensive revisions, since you will have already dealt with the plot holes and major structural issues in the outline. This allows them more time during the editing to focus on refining the writing itself, such as trimming unnecessary details, improving dialogue, or tightening the language in a fast-paced fight scene. Overall, plotting usually provides a solid foundation for the first draft, allowing writers to concentrate on enhancing the narrative during the editing process, rather than trying to understand it. Weaknesses of plotting. Con 1. Front-loaded work. Creating an outline for a novel, especially for new writers, can feel like a monumental task. While outlining offers clarity, it is a labor-intensive process that requires establishing the story's trajectory from the outset. In order to outline well, it may be necessary to think through numerous possibilities at every decision point of your narrative, which can be mentally exhausting. Even once the outline is done, it can be possible that you will encounter a conflict or new possibility during the course of the writing, which results in some of the outline needing to be redone. For some writers, the task of outlining can be so daunting that they can feel burnt out before the writing even. Con number 2. Over-engineered plot. Crafting a compelling story often hinges on keeping readers in suspense until the final pages, anticipating that gratifying moment when all the intricate threads connect. When the story is fully outlined, it can be tempting to showcase one's cleverness by weaving every plot element together. Unfortunately, this cleverness also has the potential to telegraph surprises and spoil them for the reader long before they occur. Even without spoiled surprises, the tendency to include every plot element on screen for plotters can leave the narrative feeling overly complex and forced, rather than authentic. And finally, Con 3. Plotting forever. As I mentioned earlier, for some writers, the outlining can feel like it will take so long that they get burnt out before they even start the writing process. For others, the planning itself can become a form of procrastination. It's easy to find comfort in outlining further and further detail, world building lands that won't show up until book 3, and creating character profiles for even the least consequential characters. At some point, you need to actually start the next phase, but plotting just feels so productive. It provides the satisfaction of working on your book even after you've plotted well beyond what you actually need to get started. This effect is compounded when the plotter does actually start writing and hits their first snag. While a pantser would readjust on the fly, aviation pun, get it? Eh? Eh? No, okay. A plotter may be tempted to go back to the drawing board and refine the entire outline and already written materials for consistency. I tell you now that under no circumstances should you do this. Even if you're the world's plottiest plotter, please continue forward rather than going back and correcting what you've already written. Leave yourself a note of what needs to change, but fix it in the next draft. If you need more explanation, see Writing Your First Draft. I'll link it in the show notes. It's super helpful. When an author adopts a plotting approach, several characteristics typically define their novel. First and foremost, the plot tends to be well structured, with clear story arcs and defined narrative beats. Additionally, characters in plotted novels often have well developed backstories, motivations, and arcs. Their voice and personality tend to stay consistent throughout the story, or evolve in a very natural and intentional character progression. The overall narrative tends to be more tightly woven, making it so that the reader can follow the narrative line clearly. What I've described in this episode so far are far extreme ends of a scale. So if you heard all this and thought, Michael, none of this sounds like me, this is worse than taking those online personality quizzes, then fear not, for there is another, the Plantser, like you're saluting a daisy. I'd argue most writers are considered plantsers. That's plantser, like plant sir, hence the saluting daisies pun. Combining elements of both planning and pantsing in their writing process. While some writers may lean heavily into plot, most fall somewhere in between. A plantser may prepare by outlining key details or character arcs, but still enjoy the spontaneity of writing certain sections. This hybrid approach allows for a blend of structure and flexibility in crafting a story. My own planting ways include outlining the narrative structure of my stories while being open to change while writing. This strategy has allowed me to take advantage of a plotter's sense of direction. While writing the first draft, I was able to stick to the broad strokes of my narrative path and rarely felt like I didn't know what was supposed to happen next. While I did make some changes to the story while writing, I was still happy with the ending I had envisioned, and made it there successfully with just a few small detours. A bonus benefit was that I knew how far I was through the draft, and I could realistically set a goal to finish by the end of the year and pace by writing accordingly. On the other hand, I prefer to discovery write my characters, to refine their personalities. The way I think of it is, when I start the story, I don't really know them yet. I just know what kind of hell I'm going to put them through. My characters grew organically from their struggles. They all started as slightly different shades of the same personality, but by the end, all three main characters felt distinct and real. But despite the beautiful blooms that came from planting, there still was a scent of manure in the air. For me, the side of planting is that my second draft has required significant rewrites. Some of the rewrites are a pitfall of discovery writing my characters. Because they changed too much during the story and not in the character growth kind of way, I had to go back and fix many of the scenes and decisions that they were a part of. Their accomplishments in the story didn't change over time, but how they got shit done definitely did. Other rewrites came from the fact that after going through the entire story in detail, I had brand new ideas that I believe will improve the story. It will still maintain the overall 3-act structure, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, please check out my episode on story structure. But many of these scenes and even some elements of the magic system will change based on these new ideas. For some stories, Changes like these will be unavoidable, especially in fiction stories where literally everything is made up. But also want to highlight that while the hybrid approach has access to all the possible advantages of pantsing and plotting, it is also susceptible to all of their pitfalls. So proceed with caution, optimism, and an experimental attitude. Ultimately, whether you lean toward plotting or pantsing, rewriting is an inevitable part of the process. It's crucial to embrace what feels natural to you, try new things, and stick to the things that work. Alright folks, that's going to wrap us up for this episode of Author Adjacent. Thank you for hanging out with me today as I presented the differences between pantsing and plotting. Now you can go buy those stickers and state your tribe proudly. Once again, I'm Michael Vadney. If any of this was helpful or even just gave you a good chuckle, consider supporting the show by leaving a review on your podcast platform of choice or telling a friend about the show. For more Author Adjacent, you can follow me on X at Author Adjacent or shoot me an email at authoradjacent@gmail.com with your burning questions, comments, or topic ideas. New episodes drop every other week, so stay tuned. Now remember, the journey from writer to author might be long, but until then, let's be Author Adjacent together.